Carry on the gun.
Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 30B, pig game disease investigation update.
For the record, Peregrine, Wolff, and now veterinarian. Okay, I think when I last spoke before the commission, gave an update on where the Southern California disease issues that were going on, how we suspected that we also had some problems in Southern Nevada, and that we were going to go ahead and investigate that. So we'll start with an update on that. So what we did, we started in the River Mountains, and we sampled 4 animals from the northern portion and 1 animal from the southern portion, and that was done lethally. By the southern portion, I mean specifically Hemingway Park, which those animals seem to come down there and spend a lot of their time there during the summertime. And we've done a fair number of marking of animals there, and really determined that there's animals that never come down to the park, and then probably the same animals that come down. So we did harvest 1 lamb from there that was exhibiting clinical signs of disease. In early November, then we went ahead when the capture crew was in town, and we targeted 10 animals out of the El Dorado Mountains, which was one of the 4 areas that we were concerned about. I asked the capture crew to look for animals that weren't keeping up, because that's been one of the methods that's been used to determine if animals have pneumonia or not, or sick, is the ones that aren't keeping up. And they did bring back a lamb that said, yeah, they could tell from where they were that she was not keeping up, and so we did go ahead and euthanize her. We then went across the McCullough Mountains and sampled 10 animals there. And then we followed up with the Spring Range. That was the last area we did. We did 13 animals, and we were particularly wanting to target animals north and south of Highway 160, because we felt that Highway 160 might be an effective barrier to disease between the northern and southern population. We wanted to confirm whether that was happening or not. In addition, we got 2 animals, both from below and above Highway 160. We noticed that we had 2 animals that had very, very severe forms of contagious eczema or sore mouth, which is a domestic ruminant disease of sheep and goats, and now bighorn sheep. And this was interesting because it had a very unusual presentation, not only involving the mucous membranes around the mouth, but also between the digits and the feet, and then also in the armpits. So we were concerned that might be something different, but it did come out as contagious eczema. So this is just an overall map of southern Nevada, and what we have here is the 4 areas that we sampled. And what we were focusing on is looking for Mycoplasma ovopneumoniae antigen by PCR, and that we do by swabbing in the nose. We also blood tests for MOV antibodies, so that means that the animals have been exposed to the disease. And then 2 of the other respiratory viruses that we routinely screen for are PI3 and BRSV, which are fairly common in almost all of our bighorn herds across the state. So I put the little red skull and crossbones there, and that's sitting over Hemingway Park, and it's also sitting in the El Dorados. And that just means that I confirmed that we have animals in both those populations that had clinical and also pathological evidence of pneumonia that was caused by, or consistent with Mycoplasma ovopneumoniae. We know that in the hunt units that are shaded brown, and overlaying that is the bighorn distribution, that's why it kind of looks a little patchwork. Those are the hunt units where we have suspected that we have a disease event. Either we're finding dead animals, we are finding animals that are exhibiting clinical signs of coughing or sneezing or not being able to run, and also documented for supposed poor lamb production. But I didn't put the skull and crossbones there because in those other ones we have not actually confirmed that we've had animals with pneumonia. I haven't necropsied them and said, yes, these animals had pneumonia, but all the signs point to that. We didn't find anything that we didn't already suspect. All 4 of those mountain ranges, we confirmed that animals were shedding Mycoplasma pneumoniae from their nasal passages, and that we also confirmed that there was exposure with positive antibody testing. So I don't think that this was a big surprise. It was kind of what we suspected all along, and it's also mirrors what they have been finding down in the Old Dad and Marble Mountains, where they seem to have had an acute die-off down there, and we may have had an acute die-off of a certain percentage of animals in the river mountains. However, the Hemingway Park animals seem to just get sick. We noticed a lot of coughing, but those animals appeared to recover before they left for the winter. So what are our next steps? One of the important things that we want to do is strain type the Mycoplasma pneumoniae, and that way we can tell if there's genetic relatedness between the different strain types. We want to do that between the mountain ranges because it's important to know if we can try to figure out where this might have come from. Are we dealing with sheep that are moving it back and forth? Could we be dealing with separate point sources, potential domestics that had been in there and infected the animals? We also wanted to make sure that, is this related to Southern California isolates, especially in the Spring Range and the McCulloughs? Is there a potential connectivity that's going all the way down? Either, they gave it to us or we gave it to them. I don't think that that's happened, but hopefully with the strain typing, we will be able to tell that. When they've done strain typing, certainly during the 2009-2010 outbreak, when they looked at Mycoplasma pneumoniae strains across many of the 5 western states, they did not find that the strains in Nevada were related to the strains in Montana. So the strains that were associated with an outbreak tended to be with that population of animals or between 2 related populations. So the other thing we need to do is finalize the survey data that Pat collected during his fall surveys. He's been, I know he still has videotape to go through to look at animals and try to, firmly confirm lamb production numbers and lamb production recruitment in various parts of the range. And then I think because we have documented that there is some lamb recruitment issues, that we need to continue to monitor population effects, not only for lamb recruitment, and also to see if there's differences happening between the ranges, and also if there's differences happening within the ranges in the northern portion and the southern portion. I also think it's very interesting to look between the North River Mountains and the South River Mountains, the animals that come into Hemingway Park, and see if there's any differences in survivability or lamb recruitment between those different populations. One of the things that we did do also during this November capture is we sent, where the circle is, we sent 50 animals from the Mighty Mountains to Utah. We are particularly concerned because there was a question of whether there was potential crossing of animals from the River Mountains into the Mighty Mountains, which would obviously be a disease corridor. Looking at the genetic data from both some of the researchers in California that have been doing long-term genetic data, and also the genetic data that we've collected and is being run by a graduate student at UNR, they felt very strongly that there was not at least genetic connectivity between those populations. And as you can see, after testing 50 animals and then also combining our last year's tests, that those animals are neither shedding MOV or nor do they appear to have been exposed to MOV. So perhaps we have a case where the genetic data and the disease data are backing each other up, and that there is little to no connectivity, which is good because that Mighty Mountain population is well over 1,000 sheep and it's a large population. So we were very pleased about that. We also did some internal translocations with 50 sheep out of the Bear Mountains. And we were in there 2 years ago and also did disease screening for that population then. And they're a very clean population. And again, it looks like, they're a clean population. There's been no potential exposure to MOV. None of them had antibodies, and we were not able to get that from any of the many nasal swabs. So I think that is, compared to the rest of the southern Nevada area, that's actually good news. So if you just look up here, this is the sheep range, and we've done some surveillance in there, and those animals both do have MOV that they're shedding, and also they've been exposed to antibodies. And this up here, that little pink is antibodies that we did some surveys in the Paranagats after a hunter had reported shooting a mouflon that was, or a Barbary sheep that was running around. So what do we know? What is some of this data combined with all the rest of our data that we've been focusing on trying to get a handle on what's happening with most of our many herds of bighorn sheep in Nevada? When we look back, the majority of the pneumonia outbreaks in the state of Nevada and the related disease events have been associated. When we look, we're always finding Mycoplasma pneumonia that's present there. The other thing that I think is a little bit disturbing is that Nevada and other western states have purposely translocated, we haven't, but other states have purposely moved clean animals into herds that have had MOV and ended up having that animal die. There was a case there where they were trying to restore a ram to the lost ski herd in Oregon, and they moved an MOV-free lamb in with these girls, hoping that they could start this population back up. And unfortunately, in a couple of months, he was dead, and he had died of pneumonia. And there's also documentation of self-translocation where the animals have translocated themselves, and they were clean animals and then went into a disease herd. And we've had that happen in the snowstorms where we brought animals from the pine forest and relocated them to the calicos, and then found out through our satellite collars that there was a small group that had gone and joined the snowstorms. We then went in and harvested 2 of those animals and found out that they had, since they had been in there, had contracted Mycoplasma pneumoniae, and even though they both appeared clinically normal when they were taken, the lamb had evidence of pneumonia when he was necropsied. So when we look across with Mycoplasma pneumoniae, it's not a new disease. It's been there all the time. The problem has been is that it's a very, very fussy bacteria, and it doesn't like to just grow on a culture plate. It grows up on a culture plate, and then if you start to look at it too intensely, it gets all freaked out and dies. So it took development of some of these techniques like polymerase chain reaction and development of some of these ELISA tests in order for us to really find it. There's been a big push by the pathologists, especially up at Washington State, where they're doing a lot of this research, to now start going back and looking at preserved lung tissue from pneumonia events that were all read out as primary Pastorella, and start looking for the signature characteristics that Mycoplasma leaves behind in the tissues. And lo and behold, when they go back 10, 15 years, they're finding that Mycoplasma was there all along, but we weren't really recognizing it as a pathogen because it's so difficult to grow up in a culture. And instead, we were focusing on the big blitzkrieg that the Pastorella bacteria do when they come in and basically trash the lungs. So when I talk about MOV, it's not new. It's always been there. It's just that we're better able now to recognize it. So when we look at MOV in herds across the West, we see a number of different scenarios that occur. So we usually see an all-age die-off with then subsequent multiple years of poor lamb recruitment. The lambs are born, we document them there in the spring, by the fall there's none left, and they're documenting lambs dying. Oregon has, again, the lost Steen herd. That's been having poor lamb production and basically managing itself to extinction for well over 10 years. Colorado has multiple herds, and I think that after one of the original die-off surviving ewes died 18 years later, the population finally started going back up. We certainly documented this in Nevada, Ruby Mountain, and this is just since I've been here we've had previous die-offs, but I'm only talking since 2007 when we grew away, or 2009 when we've had veterinarians consistently here. The Ruby Mountains has had 4 years of poor lamb production. The Snowstorms has had 2 years of post-die-off. Pancakes, Duckwater Hills, again 2 years, and I think Pete kind of bore that out with his study that, when you look at the pancakes, the disease, it correlates very closely with disease. And then the pilot, Lucky Hills, it's been 3 years, and they're not doing particularly well. So if you look at our overall disease map of the state, where we're trying to kind of plug in information about all of our herds. Up here at the top is the snowstorms, and we know they've had a die-off. They've had animals survive, but they've had, again, this year, collected biologists, there were lambs in the spring, and then he saw sick lambs, and now there's none. East Humboldt, or Ruby Mountains, Pilot, Lucky Hills, the whole Pancake, Duckwater Hills area, again, is continuing to have poor lamb production. Then we have these areas down here in southern Nevada where we still have to, the River Mountains is fairly new that this is happening in, and we really need to get, now that we have a better understanding of what's happening in the other 4 mountain ranges, we can get a better idea. The other thing that seems to have happened, and this has just been really studied since the massive 2009-2010 outbreak, is there's an all-age die-off with 1 to 2 good years of good lamb production, then it goes back down in the toilet and you have poor lamb recruitment. And this is what the experience has been of Montana, which went in and tried to do a scorched earth. Basically, they helicopter ran animals up the hill, and if they couldn't run and keep up, they were killed. So that was their method of determining who lived and who died. Washington has gone in now a number of times because they can't seem to stop the disease in a couple of herds, and I think they finally went in and eliminated a herd, but they had a couple of good years, and then lamb production went back down again. In the Hells Canyon complex, which is a very well-studied herd, this has been well documented, where they think that for some reason they'll have a couple of years of good lamb recruitment, other animals may move in, or they don't understand why, but then it goes back down again. So that's the second scenario. The other scenario that's very rare, but we actually have a case, is where you have an all-age die-off or a disease event followed by apparently no lamb recruitment issues. That seems to be occurring in the Slate Fairviews, where there was a die-off in 2007, and it appears that lamb production has bounced back. And then there's one known herd in the western United States, the Kofa, on the Kofa in Arizona, that is an MOV positive herd that appears at this time to not be having any problems. There was another one, but then they did start having problems. So this is currently the only one where there appears to be fairly normal lamb production, even though these animals are MOV positive. So what are the differences? Why are the differences? They don't really understand that. Tom Besser up at Washington State University was on his second year putting in for a large National Science Foundation grant to try to look at this as a recognized emerging disease in bighorn sheep across the West. Certainly, we know that there's different strains. I mean, every year we get vaccinated by the flu for a flu vaccine, and sometimes strains of flu can be real killers, and sometimes they can be very mild. And bacteria are the same way. In domestic animals, it's well recognized that there are various strains of different bacteria that if your cow gets them, they're probably likely to be dead versus they're just going to be mildly sick. So we do not know enough about Mycoplasma ovonemoniae and the different strains that are present in our bighorn sheep to understand why some of them end up killing the entire herd, and we have years and years and years and years of decrease to no lamb production, and why we have a few cases where we may have a disease event and then things appear to get better fairly rapidly. And of course, there's many other factors. These animals are not just living by themselves with just MOV. They have other bacteria present. They have pressures of habitat and conditions that are going on. So, and there appears that there might be even a difference between desert sheep and how they respond to some of these die-offs, and how some of the California and Rocky Mountains, when you look across the whole scope of die-offs, some of the massive 90% losses have been in these northern breeds, and it seems like you have a number of sheep die, but maybe not an all-herd die-off, which is currently what we've been seeing in the deserts. So there's still a lot of questions to be answered, and there's a lot of intensive research going on out there to try to answer some of these questions as it relates to Mycoplasma ovonemoniae. So what do we do now if we know that the majority of our pneumonia-related disease events are tied to MOV, and that we do have worries about translocation and also animals that are self-translocating? We have been addressing this. There was a workshop that I co-chaired with Colorado in September of 2013. We got some money from WAFWA, and all the directors agreed to send their veterinarians or support their wildlife health professionals to go, and then we got money to pay for those people that could absolutely not travel. And we pulled them all together for a very intensive day-and-a-half meeting in Fort Collins. We had 7 western states represented, all of those that had large bighorn sheep populations, and then 2 of the wildlife veterinarians from British Columbia and from Alberta. One of the things that we wanted to do is because, you know, every time we test herds, every time we deal with a disease event, we're almost always left with more questions than we are answers. We have a lot of bad news answers, but we don't have a lot of good news answers. So we need to develop consistent testing protocols for pneumonia and bighorn sheep. And then the other thing we need to do is really look at the pathology that's being done. They found that you really, depending on where you sample and how you look at these tissues under the microscope, are you just picking up the Pasteurella? Are you just picking up mycoplasma? And they have very, very different signatures that they need. So we all use different pathologists, and we all want to make sure that those pathologists are all reading out the histopathology the same way, so that when I'm talking to someone in Arizona that has dead sheep, or even when I'm talking to 2 different pathologists that I use, I know that they're telling me the exact same thing, and that we're comparing apples to apples rather than apples to oranges. So that was another take-home message that became very, very apparent. One of the things that this came out of was Colorado chose to depopulate 2 of their herds. They, and before they did that, they put vits in the females in one herd, and then when they went off, they all went in and radio-collared these lambs, and they followed these lambs out. And this was a herd that was known to have very poor lamb recruitment. They then took another group of ewes and basically just eliminated that entire population. It was another population that had a very poor lamb recruitment and had disease. They moved that to the Seville Wildlife Facility in Wyoming, and they had a graduate student that studied those ewes and their lambs and what happened to those lambs. In the end, all of the lambs died. None of them were euthanized. They all died of pneumonia, whether they were wild lambs that were radio-collared. Some of them died of predation on the wild lambs, but in the end, they all died all about the same time of pneumonia, and all of the captive lambs died. And what they found was that when they opened them up, some of the lambs had very obvious clinical signs and histopathology associated with mycoplasma, where some of them had this horrible Pasteurella pneumonia. There's probably mycoplasma visually underneath that, but the Pasteurella took over. So you can see that those were 2 very well-studied herds, and basically they had no lamb recruitment at the end of the day, and they were all dead. So they felt that it was very important to be consistent when you're looking at the histopathology on these animals. The other thing that we needed to do was, a lot of states now are looking at trying to get an idea of what's going on. What's the basic herd health level with their populations of bighorns? I mean, what diseases do they have? And then also, so they're trying to identify population status, and they're also trying to identify translocation risks. Certainly Nevada translocates more sheep because we have more sheep, but we also move more sheep around internally than any of the other western states. So we wanted to make sure that before we move sheep, we have a kind of a good idea of what's acceptable risk and what is an unacceptable risk. So one of the things that came out of that, one of the consistent statements that we all agreed on, was that if you have an MOV positive herd that has experienced a disease event or a die-off, or if you're just doing a basic herd health screening and you have Mycoplasma ovidiumoniae plus leukotoxigenic Pasteurella species, that this is considered a high risk for translocation, something that you probably don't want to be involved in doing. So even though this disease has been around for a long time, we now understand it more, and it's certainly a very bad player to have in your herds. So when we look around at the state, we see that we have some small, clean areas up here where we just appear to have our run-of-the-mill respiratory viruses, which we see across all of our herds. Here's a herd that we have some idea that there's some poor lamb recruitment going on, and the population is stagnating. We've now tested it a couple of years in a row and found out that even though we have not been able to recover the antigen out of the nose, the animals have definitely been exposed to the disease. They feel that there's about, after an initial disease event, there's about a 10% carrier rate of animals that are shedding mycoplasma. So if we are catching, we probably caught about 10 animals out of there over the past 2 years, so maybe we're just missing the carrier animal. We have the snowstorms. We have the snowstorms where we know we have ongoing issues. We've got issues here in the East Humboldt and the Ruby Mountains, the Pilot Lucky Hills. We have gotten, this is Mount Moriah, and we have animals that have been shedding, and we still have some questions about that herd. Again, I've only colored in the ones brown that I can say, I've had my hands on dead animals and I know that they have pneumonia, where we have a documented disease event. So if we have the disease that's there, we might have lamb recruitment issues, but until we can positively say we have lambs or we have adults that are dying of pneumonia, I'm not really feeling comfortable that I can personally cover in that block. This is the whole Pancake Mountains, Duckwater Hills, where we had a die-off in 2011. And we still continue to have animals there that are positively shedding and have poor lamb recruitment. This is the Fairview Slates, where we have definitely have animals that are still shedding, and we definitely have exposure, but we don't understand why those animals appear to have bounced back. And we have a very nice clean area through here on the California border where we have some of our very, very clean sheep. And then we come down into southern Nevada where we seem to have, at least in the River Mountains, we have an emerging issue going on. And probably what's happening in the Spring Range, McCulloughs, and the Eldorados might have been happening for at least the last 1 to 2 years. So I think that one of the things that we are concerned about, and I'm concerned about when we're looking at moving animals and the pressures that we have, is that we certainly don't want to take an animal from this dirty area or any of these areas. And the River Mountains has been our go-to population for many, many years. And we moved a lot. If you look at the genetics of many of the desert populations in Nevada, you're going to find River Mountain sheep there. But I certainly wouldn't want to stick animals that were MOV positive in areas where we know that sheep are moving amongst themselves, because I think that we could create an overall disaster in a large portion of, particularly of our very clean herds. So that's kind of an update of where we are right now with what we learned from the Southern Nevada disease event and where we're kind of going in our continuing attempt to try to classify where we all are with all of our different herds in Nevada so we can get an overall health picture. Anybody have any questions, comments?
Commissioner McBeth?
Dr. Wolff, you mentioned that there was genetic differences between the herd and the muddies and the river mountains, but the only area that separates those two are the Frenchman and Sunrise Mountain range, which is not a very, they're very close. And once they come off of Sunrise, they really dump right into the Gala Hills, which is the blacks and the muddies, right the edge of those two. And so, is there any discussion about the movement of sheep?
Well, yes, and that was, I mean, when we had said that we were going to provide sheep to Utah, certainly we did not want to send them sheep that, by the time we've got the test results back, those animals are out of the trailer. So we did not want to say, okay, we're going to augment all of your herds with animals that have mycoplasma pneumonia. So there was a long discussion because biologist Pat Cummings was very nervous that there potentially was connectivity and movement back and forth, and there wasn't a significant barrier going on. We then looked at the next step was to look at the genetics, and then we had the previous year's testing, which showed that those animals appeared to not be exposed to MOV. So that was one little tiny piece of data, and then we went and looked at 2 different genetic studies, and the geneticists felt very strongly that sheep may be moving back and forth, but they're not leaving any genetic material behind that's in those has made it to the populations where we're taking animals from or sampling animals from, including hunter harvested. They're also getting samples from hunter harvested. So could that be a concern in the future? Yes, and we're very worried about that because that is a huge herd, and there isn't you know, an 8-lane major highway running right across there and help act as a barrier. At this point, you know, why do we not have disease over there? We don't know, because it seems like we should, but it appears that we don't, as of today.
Any other questions? The only follow-up to this that I have is, I understand that there's some hunters during check-in will tell a biologist what they saw in the field, and some of what they saw was during their scouting trips. And some of what they tell the biologist during check-in during their scouting trips is concerning. And my follow-up question, maybe Mike Cox might be the one to answer it. We used to have a mandatory sheep indoctrination that we probably could have educated our sheep hunters a lot more to look for certain things. And I took a lot of heat for you being part of getting rid of mandatory sheep indoctrination. But with this type of situations going on and the discussion we just had, I believe there could be a benefit to bringing mandatory sheep indoctrination back.
Well, some of the things that we have been doing is, during those hunters that do come to the sheep indoctrinations, we do have sampling kits available. Because not only are we collecting a lot of great genetic information, we're collecting liver samples and lung samples. We have on occasion picked up evidence of mycoplasma on hunted sheep lungs. So we're asking the hunters to please collect, and you're familiar with that. And then and also to mark down, did the animal have nasal discharge, did the animal appear to have lung issues, you know, what was going on that you saw there. So we're trying to collect that. And then we did look at some of our at-risk herds or herds that have had a history of poor lamb production, but we don't have the hands-on sampling data to back up anything at this time. We picked those herds, we targeted those specifically, those hunters, and sent them out kits and asked them specifically if they would mind sending that stuff in. So we are doing that, but yeah, there's a lot of information being given at those sheep indoctrinations.
I'm thinking of instances, you had that big section along the California border there that was said to be clean, and I know that there's a few people that during sheep check-in said that they saw coughing sheep during the scouting, and I'm going, wow, how did we miss that? And how did the hunter not know when they saw a coughing sheep and not calling the department right away? Mike, can you tell me some type of percentage of participation? My son has a sheep tech this year, and we didn't make indoctrination. If it was mandatory, he would have been there.
Mike Cox, it has been dropping. I helped with Chris Hampson and NRT at the Reno one. And it was disheartening. You would hope that people would, without being forced, would show up when it's busy lives. I don't know. I'm just going to tell you personally, I've never wanted it to go. I know professionally, it's hard for us to force people to do things. We're trying to be, you know, a good state agency, a good governmental agency, not putting the thumb on our constituents and putting the onus on them to be responsible. But I will admit, with the information that is very important to us, their ability to be our eyes in the field, and some of the things that we need their help on, certainly it's a consideration.
I just think how many days I have in the field prior to the season this year, and I'm just one out of 300 tags this Sunday night. And you count the number of hours behind glass and the hours, man days in the field, and the information that could be gathered that could be helpful to the department. I think a mandatory sheep indoctrination class and a guy making a guy take one day out of his life is a very small price to help the department out. So maybe, I don't know what everybody else thinks, but I know Director Walden stepped out for a second or something, but I'd like to see the talk of a mandatory sheep indoctrination coming back just for this type of situation. Anybody else have anything? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay.
Unless you have something else to add.
Yep, I'll go ahead, Sam.
Dr. Lane?
I guess my question to you is, in terms of looking at the things that need to be done, in terms of research dollars and the communication that goes on among all these people that are involved in this, are there issues, are there things that this commission can help you with, or things that this commission may need to do, such as the reintroduction of the orientation? Are there other things that, that need to be explored? I guess that's my question to you.
There are, certainly I think that, you can see from the dots, those are animals that we have gone ahead and sampled. We still have a lot of questions out there, and I think that they're, always the more information. I mean, Mike and I arm wrestle about, are we going to sample 5 animals, or are we going to sample 10 animals? And I'm currently stronger, so I strangle him down until he agrees that we're going to sample 10 animals there. But then, of course, that means we sample 3 herds, 10 animals each, and we don't necessarily get to do the other 6 herds that we really have absolutely no information on, except from when they were last translocated, when they were put there or went there on their own. So, the best way that we can get a handle on what's going on with these herds is to actually have some information on them. And the most cost-effective way to get information on a large group of animals at a time, or a statistically significant amount of animals at a time, is to actually do a helicopter measurement capture and draw blood and take all of our swabs and get a feeling for them. And certainly, we have gained a lot of information. In fact, our sportsmen and women were the ones that alerted us to some of the issues that were going on, and hikers and people that are out enjoying the outdoors. And then that gives us an opportunity to also do some follow-up targeted sampling. So that's that's where we gain the most information, because with a coughing sheep, can't we forget that the respiratory diseases, especially PI3 and BRSV, which are 2 common livestock, sheep, goats, cattle, respiratory disease that are commonly throughout all of our herds and all of our herds in the West, those can cause a little flare-up of that, can also cause coughing too. So if we hear something about a coughing sheep, okay, do we have a problem? Usually PI3 does not end up resulting in poor lamb recruitment. You might just have a wave of it going through, everybody coughs, it's like kids getting a cold, and then everybody gets better. You don't have lambs dying, you don't have adults dying. It causes morbidity, but it does not cause mortality. But if we just hear coughing sheep, we need to make sure that we can, get a helicopter, do flights in the spring. Do we have lambs? Do we do flights in the fall? Do we have lambs that are still there? Do we have the money and the time and the opportunity to get in there and look at 10 of those animals and say, is this another herd that's got MOV, or is this just a herd that went through a little blip of PI3 that flared up and caused some coughing animals? So getting our hands on animals and being able to do long-term follow-up is probably one of the most important things. And what a lot of the dollars that are being aimed at this big NSF grant is looking to try to pick 5 herds across the West and collar 30 animals and then monitor them for a 5-year period. And a lot of that budget is they're going to pick up the bill to try to do that. So you can see it's very intensive to try to look at that sort of thing, but you get a lot of useful information.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Quick, the GI3 does it have some characteristics only of coughing, or do they have nasal discharge also?
It's usually mainly coughing with a slight nasal discharge, but there's been one documented case in Colorado where they had some animals that got very sick, and they think they had a couple of lamb mortalities where the only thing that they could get out of the animals was PI3, but that happened a number of years ago, and it's not been commonly thought to be any type of problem. With the Mycoplasma pneumoniae, what we tend to see is profuse nasal discharge that is heavy mucoid, and the one lamb that we sacrificed out of the Eldorados when we swab in their sinuses, because the bacteria hangs out in your sinuses and it hangs out in the inner ear. And that animal had about a half a cup of mucus stuck up in one of her sinuses. So you can imagine when that's draining out. We saw that too with some of our herds where they've had very heavy discharge. However, we also have some that we've gotten the bacteria out of where they might have just kind of a wet nose. So they go through these periods of shedding. Kind of like you have a cold sore when you're stressed, you get a cold sore, but you always have that herpes bacteria that you got in there. So.
All right. Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 30C, Bear Committee report. Commissioner McNinch.
Mr. Chairman, so there have been a few developments with regards to bears and bear management. I guess I'll start with since our last meeting, there were a couple of meetings with the Incline Village General Improvement District. I guess I'll do a little quick recount here. If everybody can recall, we had a Washoe County Commission was going to take on the issue of solid waste management in Washoe County. And at one of our meetings prior to the September meeting, the board had, the commission had authorized me to write a letter to those entities that are going to be talking and modify that letter in a way to fit the situation. As we were taking that letter to Washoe County in support of their discussions and dealing with trash management issues, I mean literally like pretty much the 12th hour, we had to pull that off of the table for a lot of political reasons, I think is the best way to put it. And it wasn't going to be heard at the Washoe County Commission, and they basically punted to other entities, including Incline Village General Improvement District. The reason for that was that they didn't feel that they had the authority to do what everybody was expecting them to do with regards to trash management, and by doing anything, they would have to mandate trash management, solid waste management countywide. They didn't have the ability to be surgical about it. So they punted to IVGID. We modified our letter, and we did provide a letter at the meeting. Director Watson and myself were at the meeting, and the department read a letter into the record supporting their efforts to, limit trash to bears as a food source, and we read the letter that I believe everybody got a copy of from the commission into the record. What's happened is that IVGID has had to open up their franchise agreement with their solid waste management, which is a very significant issue. Opening up a franchise agreement with a waste management company is a big deal. They had a few years left on the agreement, and when you do these things, when you get it settled, you're usually in it for 10 or 15 more years. 15, I think, is usually what they're targeting. So it's kind of a unique opportunity when the discussion started, and there was a lot of kickback from members of the board. There was some kickback. They had a second meeting. IVGID staff brought together proposals and had a lot of discussion with their franchise with the solid waste management company. And they actually, there's some other things with the solid waste that that are getting kind of thrown into the mix. But the bottom line is that I think that the board has an appetite for considering some changes in their solid waste management franchise agreement with the waste management company pertinent to their commercial side of things. I think that's, if I'm reading things correctly, I think that there's going to be some movement in that area. When it comes to residential, requiring bear-resistant containers or wildlife-resistant containers, there's definitely been some pushback by the board. They're taking a lot of heat in their community because the options aren't necessarily palatable. Okay, so you have this struggle going on between some of the IVGID members and some of the community members with being leaders in their community and establishing a community that places a high value on bears, in the sense that we're not going to enable them by providing them a food source. And we need to take a role, and we need to be leaders, and we need to make some tough decisions and say, no, we're not going to allow that to happen, and we're going to be aggressive about those that do it purposely, and we're going to do what we can to limit access to trash for bears. I think at the last meeting, I was worried that they were going to move forward with some direction, but they didn't. And they kind of kicked the can down to the next meeting, which will be held next Tuesday. And the proposal's on the table. It sounds like that board is kind of a 50-50 deal on the residential. So there might actually be a chance here that when the dust settles a little bit, the next meeting or two for them, that some of our solid waste issues that have been compounding the interaction with bears up at Incline might resolve itself through the board of the General Improvement District and the trustees. So we'll see where it goes next Tuesday. I think it's a real positive step. There's been good discussion on it. The IPGID personnel are clearly very supportive of the effort, and I think that board is really more on the fence than I thought they might be. So we might actually have something positive happen. There is a homeowners association in the Collin Ranch area, and it sounds like they're taking up as a homeowners association. They're kind of establishing a thought process to take some responsibility within their homeowners association and pushing people to do things voluntarily and not allow garbage to be the food source for bears. And it sounds like the city of Reno, that there's a city councilwoman that meeting held here. It sounds like she is showing an interest. So I think we're getting some movement in localized areas and some of our problem areas, at least in Washoe County. There's still some complications in Douglas and Carson. They're managed by different waste management companies or processes. There was a suggestion. I'll get to that in a second. So we've got a little bit of movement with regards to the trash management bears, urban interface bears getting into trouble. I think there's some good energy in that area, and I think we're making progress. And Tony, I know you missed a lot of the discussion. Did you have anything that you really wanted to throw out before we moved to the meeting the other night? So last Thursday night, we had a meeting, the Bear Committee meeting met, and the meeting was generally in a sense, it's kind of an update, current events type of a meeting where we're kind of reestablishing communication. It was a lot of information is what it was. But having said that, there's a need to move forward with the comprehensive review that the commission has promised to conduct. It's a 3-year comprehensive review, and we're at the end of the 3rd-year hunt here in December, and we have to have that discussion by the February meeting, commission meeting, because that's where seasons are set, and we have to make some decisions at that time. Compounded, we have to do those things early enough for the county advisory boards to process and develop their thoughts and ideas and get their input on it. So where this is all headed is that we're going to have a number of very complicated discussions, complex issues in a very, very short period of time. And Commissioner Drew and Catherine Bricker, member of the committee, have committed to getting together and putting a list of agenda items together. Items that might be relevant, that might be that have to be addressed by that February deadline, so that we can get busy on them and have some discussions and come up with some recommendations for the full commission at the February meeting. So I guess the take home is we've started talking more about bear stuff again, and we're going to see some very aggressive meetings here. Or mid-January, I think, is the time frame. And we're probably going to have to turn them around very quickly. I anticipated, 6, 8, 10 issues that are going to need to be reviewed and understood as part of a comprehensive review by that February commission meeting. And 2 or 3 meetings if we have to, and we know what they usually run into. You know, they're usually a few hours long, and I think that's the update. I don't have anything else on my own notes here. I don't know if Jeremy or Jack had anything they'd like to add real quick, but I think that's.
I think that about handled it. All right, you have anything, Jeremy? Okay, we'll close agenda item 30C, we'll move on to 30D, Tag Allocation Committee. A lot of what we covered last night, we dealt with today with the elk and the different management strategies on elk. The other thing we dealt with last night was the survey. And I'm encouraged to say that I think the survey's coming along very well. I think we have some tremendous people helping us do the survey out of Idaho that will make sure that when we do the survey, we get unbiased and best results we can from the survey and properly measure what our hunting public wants. So I think things are going along very well in the survey. Do you have anything else to add to that? Beth? All right. Anybody else have any questions on tag allocation? Okay.